Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest in a series of ISE podcasts that are dealing with issues that we're all facing at the moment, tackling the coronavirus crisis. This is obviously a very challenging time for us all, as individuals, families, and as students, but also actually how our industry needs to respond to the current situation. So we covered quite a few subjects on this webinar. We did do one on internships last week where we had a number of employers sharing their experiences around how they'd gone virtual. That's on the website, so if you want to go back and listen to that, I recommend that you would do. But today we're going to hear from Andrew. Andrew and I had a conversation last week about this, and it's been a thought of mine for a little while that actually universities have lots of experience of delivering teaching and learning virtually, of creating virtual projects, dealing with all sorts of sort of barriers out there that could really be a useful experiences for us all. And when Andrew and I spoke, what struck me, he was talking about some of the work they've been doing, over recent years, that was actually creating, real virtual projects that students took part in with real businesses, and they were actually paid for. So actually, they weren't, the idea of maybe a business case study, which always has something of an artificial nature about it. It was real work. So I thought that would be a great opportunity to share that with our community, because I think there's lots of things we'll be able to learn and all adapt to our own individual situations. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll hand over to Andrew in a sec. For those that haven't done an ISE webinar, welcome. Those of you that aren't ISE members, welcome as well, because at the moment we're opening out our webinars to a much broader community. So welcome along to one of our webinars. Great to have you here. The way we'll work with the questions, because there are a lot of people on our webinars at the moment. You'll see a dialog box where you can ask questions. So if you type in your questions as we go along, what I will do is I'll field those to Andrew at the end. So once Andrew's finished his presentation, we'll have time to go through those questions. So please, as you think of a question, pop it into the dialog box, then I'll cover those at the end. At the end of the webinar, you will get an email, which will be which will give you a recording for it so that you can go back and pick up anything that you want to revisit. Also, feel free to share that with people in your team so they can access the webinar as well. It's a full recording with voice and slides. So that will be available to you once the webinar has finished. That's enough for me. Andrew's the person you've all tuned in to listen to. So Andrew, can I hand over to you now?
Thanks very much. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Ferguson. I work for the University of York. I'll talk to you a little bit about virtual internships, something that we've been doing at the university since around 2015. And last summer, around 20% of the projects that we facilitated through our Student Internship Bureau were virtual. So that is around 20 projects with external organisations. So the first slide, you can see that the photograph is not the view from my office window. It's in the east wing of my mansion. It is North Yorkshire, and you can see straight away that there's not a great deal in there, and more of that later. So this is what we're going to be covering. First, some definitions of what virtual internships in my context certainly are, where they came from at York, some examples to show what they can do. I think this is the meat of the presentation. Will be looking at some of the issues that we faced in putting these together, and some of the responses that we've since developed to handle them. And then finally, a little bit of look at the horizon for virtual internships at York and how we might be developing them in the future. So first off, let's have a look at what we might define as an internship. I recently discovered that HMRC have a very, very particular view of what an internship is, and there may be a seminar in itself to be talked about that. But let me say about what we would regard as a virtual internship. The first thing is that it's project-based, so it's not about the standard work of the organisation. It has an output that the student owns and has to deliver within the time frame. The second point is that most of our virtual internships are between 4 and 8 weeks long. They can be full-time or part-time, and as we all probably are finding at the moment, working from home means that sometimes the difference between full and part-time is sometimes difficult to judge, and we often find that the part-time projects give far more to the employer than the full-time ones. I think this is a very important point. Predominantly, our internships tend to be with SME businesses, and because they're smaller businesses, they're not really used to working with students or graduates, and it tends to be one intern working alone on the project, and I think that's quite important. We have had projects where students have worked in virtual teams, but by and large, we're talking about small, medium-sized enterprises. And the final factor is that the internships are all paid, and there's no academic credit attached. We hope the degree subject is occasionally useful to what the student is trying to do, but they're not formally linked to any academic credit at all. So that's the scope and the definition of the kind of internships we're looking at. Where did they come from at York? Well, they originated from, we've been running the Student Internship Bureau for maybe 15 odd years. It was the Shell STEP program, if anybody remembers that, going way back. And what we were finding is, we were very successfully placing students in small, medium-sized enterprises in and around the city of York, but there were sort of increasing demand from the very large rural hinterland that York sits alongside. And there are, in that area, we have businesses, very often lifestyle businesses, people who've moved away from the big cities, set up businesses and found that they're slightly more successful than they were anticipating. There's a need for student and graduate skills, particularly on a project basis rather than a full-time employee basis. And there wasn't a great deal that we were doing to serve those businesses. The first one we came across was a business in a lovely village called High Bentham, which is way over on the Lancashire border, where obviously we don't tend to venture if we can help it. But this was a business that was a farm diversification business. It was the farmer was making a new type of blue cheese. He had some success selling it in the States and was really looking to see how he might capitalize on this and develop the market. And got in touch to see whether he could have a student to do some market research. And our initial reaction was, well, not really, because High Bentham is well beyond the reach of a student on a bicycle going out of York. But what we worked on then was, well, how could we make this project work? And we came up with a framework for virtual internships that has been able to produce some interesting results. So I've got some examples of the kind of things that we've done through virtual internships. This is a very classic one at the moment, which is around social media marketing. And it was a part-time project, which was to look at the consistency of the messaging that was going out from a company. This is a specialist cosmetic chemicals company. They're based in a small market town just north of York. They had some social media accounts already, but the messaging wasn't terribly consistent. So the student worked to look at this and managed to increase their engagement in the principal platform, which was LinkedIn. That's where they were finding the most success. Got their engagement up by 300%. And very importantly, on the back of an article which she posted about their work, managed to get them invitations to a very prestigious conference in the sector, which saved the company £12,000, which is great, given that the internship itself only cost them about £1,200. So there's a really very good rate of return on that. Interestingly enough, the student who undertook the project was a philosophy student and hugely into lots of things. So the virtual internship worked with her because some of the time she was volunteering with various community radio stations. She was very into writing and the media, and a virtual internship really worked alongside all the other things that she had to fill her time. She now has a role at the BBC, so that's going to work for her. some of you may recognise this building. It's Castle Howard near York. Also masquerades as a Brideshead Revisited. But a few years ago, a very famous Chinese pop star got married in Selby Abbey and had his wedding reception at Castle Howard. And Castle Howard had no idea that this chap was as famous as he turned out to be, and was somewhat surprised by the very large numbers of Chinese visitors that started turning up at Castle Howard. And that prompted them to recruit a couple of virtual interns, both Mandarin speakers, who worked on the visitor experience there and managed to work on basic things like menus, signage, but also looking at how Chinese visitors interact with the signage and how they go around, looking at somewhere which is slightly different from EU and Western tourism. So that project worked part-time again over a number of weeks, and is still in some ways slightly ongoing. The final example is again another quite common one, which is where older traditional businesses are introduced to new technologies. So this was a bespoke tailoring company that makes very nice made-to-measure suits, tweed jackets, the country set, and that kind of thing. Very traditional, very long-standing company, looking to get into selling things online. And what the intern did here was basically go into the marketplace, look at the e-marketing, e-sales packages that could be bought off the shelf, did a comparison exercise, set up the successful package that came out of the procurement exercise, and then wrote the manuals for the staff to use once the internship was over. And this was an English literature student who is a typical digital native. These screens, these hashtags, they're not at all phasing for her, whereas they were quite intimidating for the company, the company members themselves. So this was a really good project for this student, because it gave her a sort of sense of expertise relatively early on, and she was able to produce some very tangible results for that company. So that gives us, if you like, three very, very typical examples, and from that I thought about some of the issues that rose out of those type of projects and the kind of things that we've addressed over time. I'm not going to go into some of the details of sort of things like contracts and pay rates and things like that, because they're very context specific to York. I've tried to keep the learning points quite general. Obviously, if anybody's interested in that, we can pick that up separately perhaps. But here are the sort of general points that I feel that we've learned from it. The first is who would like a virtual internship, and I've personally, as a manager within the Student Internship Bureau, felt that virtual internships are something that have been second best. And under the old schemes, we actually didn't like the idea that the student didn't go, was kept out of the workplace, because we felt that this wasn't a really good learning experience. It was a second best learning experience. To an extent, I am not entirely sure that that isn't true. I think certainly younger interns do value getting into the workplace, and I can see the value to it. However, we do have some students that really like the flexibility, and that might be through necessity. So they may have families, they may have other commitments, which mean that virtual internships allow them to acquire experience and earn at the same time while fitting around those other commitments. And in some cases, like our philosophy student and her other commitments, the flexibility is a choice, and it fits alongside a whole range of other things that they do. The other thing which sells virtual internships is very often they're very cool projects. So we've had one around setting up a new magazine, albeit for rural life, but nonetheless for a lot of our students do really value the idea of getting into the media and producing magazines. We've had projects looking at social media, how that works best. They involve the words like marketing, like customer profiling, market research. These are all really good terms, and the projects do attract students from that basis. They tend to be projects that play to familiar strengths. So projects which feature research, student working on their own, a variety of sources of information, that really echoes a lot of students' academic experiences. So in many ways, the virtual internship is almost a logical extension of their academic studies. They have to produce a report at the end of it, which is properly referenced, just like an essay. But it's actually not that terribly culturally different to take on a virtual internship than it is to study. And the students that have tended to go into these projects have not always been the students that are really sort of what you might call tuned into the corporate options. SME businesses on the whole tend to do their planning at a fairly last minute basis. And so most of the projects we advertise are in May, some in April, but most of them in May, some even into early June. So by that stage, some of our business students and our economic students are all busily working away for internships with some of the big corporate players, whereas students with slightly fuzzier career ambitions tend to end up taking these projects and actually finding a lot of direction and value from doing so. So next issue, and I think this is probably the biggest one from our perspective, and the university perspective, is this idea of scope and expectation. With real-world internships, projects can often develop organically. There's that interaction between the intern and the employer is an ongoing basis, and it allows the project to move away from its original design, and to do that by mutual consent. What we find with virtual projects is that that can't happen, and that really does put a lot of emphasis on initial project design. And I think this is primarily where the university adds a bit of value, because we can advise businesses on what's achievable in a time frame. We can have a look at this idea of parameters. What are the things that a student could reasonably be expected to do? By and large, we find that businesses tend to underestimate what it is that interns can achieve in the time available, but they can also overestimate the experience that our students have. So they may say, right, well, we would like a student with experience of marketing, of social media marketing, when actually what students have got is an experience of working with the medium, but not necessarily working for an organization using their skills. So using the university to help set the outputs of the project, the parameters, advising on what is appropriate in terms of the expectations on skills and experience, we've been able to come up with a sort of some basic guidelines for what a good virtual project would look like. And sometimes what we can find there is that the virtual projects do drift away from their original parameters, but they do so in a very much more structured way through various checkpoints that are built into the internship project. And that's great for us because it means that the expectations on both sides are met and not disappointed. And so far, touching all the wood I can lay my hands on, most of our projects have been successful, and they produce results that the business and the student have been able to value. So this brings us onto, I think, a peculiar issue of overperformance. And what do we mean by that? Well, underperformance on a virtual project is relatively easy to spot. If you've got proper milestone checkpoints built in where the business is checking in with the student, it's quite easy to see where the student isn't hitting the milestones, and then a discussion can take place and to explore why that might be. What often happens, though, is that York students are very conscientious, they're very diligent, and they go in and overproduce, they over respond to the brief. And if you've come across this before in business, particularly with new graduates, they tend to, because they've been used to working for themselves on their own in an academic context, they are quite used to getting things perfect, and with only their own time to spend on these things, that's not an issue. Once they move into an organization, that's actually sometimes good enough is good enough. But it's very difficult to pick up on what is good enough if you haven't got the informal clues as to what the culture of the organization is. So if you haven't got somebody at the next desk saying, actually, you know, that's fine, don't worry about it. If you are only interacting with your boss or your project manager, you will tend to overproduce perhaps, or put more work in than is actually strictly necessary or required by the organization. Because the organization doesn't see this happening, all they see is that their milestones are being hit. It can cause a lot of stress to the student because they're working much harder, and this issue isn't being picked up. So what we found was that having check-ins by somebody who isn't involved in the project at all, i.e. the university, that kind of pastoral check that the student is getting the level of their work correct is really important to having the projects go off without undue stress on the student. Issue 4 we thought was going to be really important, and that's technology. How do we deliver projects virtually? We thought it was important, and in fact we invested at the university in some big screens and specialist virtual rooms for students to sort of book into and work with the businesses on a virtual basis. And I'm sure right now, somewhere in your offices, people are debating the merits of Trello versus Asana and all the other productivity apps and pieces of technology that are flying around at the moment. And I would say that actually technology hasn't really been an issue. When we first started doing the projects, most people were using email, Skype, and telephone. And if they want to go off and use other forms of technology, and that works with the business that they're working with, that's all great. But actually, on the whole, there's enough technology and tools out there to make projects work, provided that you've got the fundamentals of project management correct. So you know what you're working to, you've got the scope of the project worked out, and you have a line of clear communication to the person who you are working for, and they're checking in with you against agreed milestones. One of the things we try to do with our students is to prepare them before they go out through induction training, and we advise them on preparing lists of options for their managers, rather than saying, what do I do at this point? We encourage them to think about what options could you present to your manager at your check-in points, so that you're not saying, you're actually giving them a tangible decision to make, rather than asking them to do the work, the mental work on your projects for you. One of the sort of final issues really is this idea of recognition and celebration. And what we sometimes find with virtual internships is that they can come across as slightly transactional. The intern delivers for the business says thank you very much and goes off with their output, and that can feel slightly underwhelming. at the end for the student. There's a sort of sense of anticlimax, and we're very keen that that isn't the case for them, and we do, alongside all our internships, provide reflective learning templates. Now, if any of you are involved in reflective learning, will know that people don't like doing it, even when they know it's good for them. They don't like doing it. So we do follow that up with some face-to-face sessions on making the most of your experiences, so that people can extract the value of what they've done for ongoing application forms, CVs, and interviews. And to even more incentivize it, we have a cash prize and a celebration event in the autumn to give a special recognition to those projects that have done particularly good work, and where the learning has been very, very clearly evidenced. And that also becomes a very nice PR event for us in the autumn, which we will hopefully have this year, even if we have to have it on a social distancing basis. So those are the 5 issues, and just to sort of look ahead slightly to the horizon for these projects. The immediate issue, I think, for us is to get the induction and project management resources online, where they will probably stay for into the future. At the moment, we like to do this on a face-to-face basis with our students before they leave us in the summer, and particularly to introduce them to other students who are working on internships, because boredom and loneliness over the vacation periods can have an impact on students' willingness to undertake this type of project. But they're going to have to go online. We're also anticipating a lot of emergency projects emerging out of the lockdown for SME support, and we are gearing for that. And I think that our interns have a lot to offer businesses as they try to adapt to the new situations that are going to emerge in the future. Longer term, what kind of trends we might see is this idea of portfolio internships, where students actually take on more than one virtual internship based on their skill set. So if they find that they're something of a whiz at social media marketing, they actually may take on more projects than just one at a time. And I can see our role as a university becoming almost like that of an agent, facilitating a range of projects for our students, although we won't be taking 10% of the earnings. Will virtual internships become the norm? Well, I think they're here to stay, certainly, and they've been around with us for 5 years, and they've grown year on year. As I mentioned at the beginning, I hope they don't become the norm necessarily. I hope that we can still see a situation where students can go into the workplace over the summer period, that they can work on a one-to-one level with people of different age groups, with different outlooks to themselves, and in an environment that's entirely different to university. There's a huge amount of learning and value in that. But as I mentioned, virtual internships do appeal to different types of student, and they can still produce good, valuable results for both the student and the intern. So finally, any questions? I put this photograph on this slide because the biggest question in my mind is, when will I see campus again? Hopefully at some point in the near future. Anyway, over to you for any questions.
That was great. Thank you, Andrew. We'll give you a virtual round of applause. It's as we would do if it was a presentation. I almost said in real life then, but you know what I mean, back out on campus. I was looking at your images very wistfully of nice summer days in and around Yorkshire, which I'm sure we'll get back to at some point. So we've got a couple of questions coming through. So I'll go through some of those with you, Andrew. So the first one I've got is around what types of pre-placement checks do you actually complete prior to setting up one of these placements?
In normal times, we would try and visit the business, and which is again a lovely thing to do, to drive around North Yorkshire in the summer months. And we would normally try and do a pre-visit to have a face-to-face chat with the business owner, to work through the project parameters, to talk about what it is they're expecting, and to work with them on those expectations to shape a suitable project. Under the current circumstances, we are doing all of those things virtually through telephones and online, and it's doing the basic checks, the normal sort of due diligence you would do with placement learning. So checking that the business exists online. You can also find out a little bit more about the business through sites such as Doodle, and just talking through the projects with the businesses. Most of our projects tend to come through networks. They tend to come through attending events and activities in different parts of the region. So very often businesses are not coming to us cold and unknown. They come to us through recommendations or through meeting people and talking to them. So those are the kind of checks that we tend to do.
Great. And next question here is, do you think there will be particular sectors engaging in more virtual internships? I guess that's around growth. Do you see any different sectors making use of these kind of tools?
Well, as I mentioned, we have had a lot of businesses which have been relatively traditional in what they do, such as things like tailoring, such as sort of craft manufacture and things like that, which have got into virtual internships as ways in which they can get market research done relatively quickly and cheaply. So a couple of years ago, we had a business which was not manufacturing, growing a range of green vegetables and fruit, and they had some of our students look at the export potential of the Far East for these products. And so that it's quite a traditional business, but it was looking at different markets, either abroad or virtual, to expand and change what they do. And using interns is quite a quick and easy way of doing that.
Thanks. And a question here from Jane, who was talking about, actually she noticed that the provision is still relatively small, around 20 projects. And do you see any challenges in actually growing that provision to a larger scale?
Well, that's been 20 virtual projects out of a much larger portfolio of projects. And I think this year, obviously, our portfolio is going to be 100% virtual. And I think that there will be challenges. I think some of those challenges are around at the moment of businesses undertaking any new projects at all, given the pressure they're under. But there's also, I think, the same kind of challenge that we as an institution went through in considering virtual internships and saying, well, is it really a proper project? Is it really a proper piece of work if the student can't come in and sit in the business? If I can't work with that student on a day-to-day basis, if I can't supervise them on a day-to-day basis, is that a proper project? Is that a proper piece of work? And some businesses, I think, are going to be more able to make that leap than others. And I think this year, with the experience of working from home, I think potentially more businesses are going to be attuned to that idea than has been in the past. So I can see there being growth, but there are still some obstacles to overcome.
And listening to the project, Andrew, I wondered if there do you see there's a role where, let's say, larger employers who may be bringing in, I think it'd be difficult for employers, that bring in sort of, 100 or 200 interns every year. But do you think there'd be scope for this where a group of, say, 20 interns could work on a project or a number of projects and working teams on a particular project? I'm thinking of some of the sort of rolling this out to larger employers.
Yes, I think there's a lot of scope. But there's a lot of challenges in that as well. I think what works best with the virtual internship is this sense of ownership that the student has over the output and the project. You know what your responsibilities are because it's nice and clearly set out for you in the project brief. If you had larger teams and more bigger scale projects, I think you do increase the ambiguities there, and potentially that's good, particularly if it's a training exercise, particularly if there's an element of development about how you work with a wider group to divide up the work and play to your strengths and all of those kind of things. But that sense of ownership and that sense of direction is really important to a virtual intern, because they don't have the cues and the guide that you would get informally from being in the office on a day-to-day basis, and you could lose that in larger teams.
Got it. A few questions actually have come through on the same theme around insurance, both the insurance for the employer and also actually for the employee. So that's around employing somebody who's working virtually, or actually the employee themselves and working from home. Has that come up as a subject that's had to be addressed differently to normal?
Well, we tend to use the standard. We have a letters of engagement which the employer uses to hire the intern. We haven't changed the letters very much, whether they're virtual or physical internships. There is the insurance is the standard insurance is employer liability insurance about the premises and the student working on premises. In real terms, if the student never visits the premises, I'm not really sure that insurance makes a huge amount of difference. Obviously, I guess the student could potentially fall over their cable at home and hurt themselves, but by and large, I'm not sure that has been a huge issue. Professional indemnity insurance, well, again, the business is engaging the student if the contract, the agreement is between themselves, the business and the student, albeit with the university in the background. And the liability for the student's work does rest with the business. So they do have to have proper supervision, they do have to have project management provisos in there. And ultimately, it's they are paying for that student's output, so they need to make sure that it's fit for purpose.
Got it. And are you seeing any changes because of COVID-19? So are you seeing, because obviously there's a lot of concern at SMEs actually, being particularly hard hit by the current situation. So are you seeing people more likely to do this because they need more virtual resource, or actually are you seeing people pulling out because there's such an issue around budgets and cash flow at the moment?
Well, so far we've been able to work with those organisations that we managed to contact before the situation developed the way it did. So we do an awful lot of marketing for the internship program in March, early March, so that we can line projects up for the summer vacation. And we are at the moment sort of developing up projects from that early period. My concern is that new projects may not emerge simply because we can't get engaged with the networking and the event sort of attendance that we do normally. we do get the sense that a lot of businesses, small business, are just in survival mode at the minute. I suspect we will do a lot fewer internships generally this summer, and that includes virtual ones. But I think coming out of the lockdown period, there are a lot of challenges that our interns will be able to help with, and that I can see new projects and new types of projects emerging, certainly into the autumn and new year.
Yes, we're seeing that as well. You know, that real, obviously lots of internships are being cancelled, but I was surprised how many employers are adapting and being able to offer, you know, different types of solutions. We've got and actually you'll have noticed this, those on the call, if you're from university, you'll have seen this come from AGAS as well. So please share it. But also to any employers on this webinar. We've got another, our second survey out in the field at the moment, where we're trying to, now that we're sort of, you know, 5 weeks into lockdown, trying to understand what's get a clear idea of what decisions employers are making, because initially it showed that roughly 60% of employers were either going to have to cancel or do something radically different with their internships, and I suspect that number's increased since that work was done. So we should have that information back out to you all round about the 11th of May. That's when we're looking to do it. A couple of other questions here, Andrew. So is it competitive for students, and actually are you doing this all year round?
Yes, we do it all year round. It's obviously it's more popular in the vacation periods when students have got more time to think about it. It is competitive. We obviously we design the project with the host organisation. We then advertise it through our university systems, and we shortlist for the business. So we send the business maybe 3 or 4 students that we know who would be able to do the job, and they make the final decision. But it is competitive. Interestingly enough, we do find that students from WP backgrounds, so widening participation backgrounds, so traditional, non-traditional backgrounds, if you like, for higher education, do better in the internship market through the university than in other areas. So in terms of, you know, the cohort size, WP students are disproportionately represented amongst the interns that we put out there, and I suspect that is because they trust the university to find them suitable work experience, and it's a limited market. These are exclusive projects for University of York students, so that they stand more of a chance of getting them.
Got it. And talking about the students and also the employees, actually, I mean, do you find that the students, are you getting very strong feedback? Do they want to do more of these? And are you getting the same employers coming back actually wanting more projects because of their experiences?
Yes, we do. We have, if you like, regulars for these projects. But as I mentioned before, with SME businesses, the planning time scales tend to be a lot shorter, and so when these businesses need a project, they need a project probably in the next month or so. So we find that we get new businesses coming in with relatively urgent requests, and some times of the year are better than others for that. So the autumn term, for example, so through October through December, is not great for internships of any colour, because you know, students are actually having to do a bit of academic work at that point.
Yes, I guess you don't want it to interfere with that. And do you have to worry about any intellectual property aspects, you know, with the work that students are doing on either side
Well,
of the contract?
yeah, that was an early issue actually. We are now, our agreement letters are now very clear. The standard agreement letters. Any output from the projects belongs to the employer. That's not to say the student can't use it in their can't use the experience in any sort of academic work that they might be doing. but they need to get written permission to do that. So the intellectual property, we decided to be very clear that that belongs to the employer.
Got it. And just, I guess, a final question to wrap up with. Are there any sort of top tips, any key bits of advice that you would give to other universities or employers who are seeking to set up a program like this?
Yes, I would say actually it isn't as wildly different from your standard internship program as all that. We didn't run around thinking about the whole issue of technology. We thought about insurance situations, type of contracting arrangements, and actually it's not as that different at all. I'd say there's a bigger emphasis on the project preparation. There's a bigger emphasis on ensuring that it's doable on a virtual basis and that expectations can be managed. But in terms of the logistics and the contracting and the sort of nitty-gritty of just running placements and internships, it's really not that different.
Right. That's great, Andrew. You've given some really good insights. Thank you very much for that. It's very much appreciated, and I'm sure as I said, we'll give you a virtual clap. I think looking at the questions coming through, that everybody's found that really engaging and really useful advice. So, Andrew, thank you very much, much appreciated. Just a final reminder that, of course, as I said, you'll get a recording of this webinar. We've got lots of other content around this whole insights, placements, work experience piece, both other webinars that we've done, and also we've got a few blogs and an employer's guide that we've written that you'll also find on our website. If you go onto the website, right at the front of the home page, there's our COVID hub. So you click on that and then it will send you to all where those various resources are. So please do make use of those and look out for more to come. We're doing roughly 2 to 3 webinars a week, and we're aiming to get 1 or 2 podcasts out every week as well, on top of our additional research. So we'll definitely keep more content coming as the situation evolves. So a final thank you to Andrew, and hope to meet you all in the virtual space, if not the real space in the near future. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.